Hi there, my name is Reese, and in my last video I explained each of the colour types and showed off the logo from the trading card game Archetype, which as of now I still haven't found. However, people from my Discord did find something interesting when searching for potential leads. In 1999, 2 copyrights were claimed for Archetype playing cards and posters by one Derefer and Reynolds. Unfortunately, that name doesn't sound familiar to me, and searching for it online doesn't bring up anything useful or Archetype related, so for now it's a bit of a dead end and maybe just a coincidence. Anyway, as I mentioned at the start of the last video, the current plan is to talk about 5 different archetypes from Archetype's first set, Genesis. As you may have guessed from the title of this video, I've gone with the first main green archetype that I can remember, the Goblin Archetype. What I remember most about the Goblin Archetype is how much I hated playing against it. But at the same time, how much fun it was to use it yourself. The effects that some of the goblins have are very annoying to play around, as will become clear later, but I'm going to start us off with the generic no effect goblin. Goblin costs 1 green material to summon, has a 2/1 stat line, and all the goblins have the goblin typing. There's not much to say really, it's just an average 1 material cost no effect element. I think the creators only made these to add some lore to the game, through the descriptions that no effect elements have. I definitely don't remember the wordings for these word for word, I just know the general beats and the gist of a story that they were trying to tell. I won't be surprised when the real versions eventually reappear, if what I've written on these is completely wrong, but never mind. Next up is Goblin Baiter. It costs 1 green material to summon, has a 0/2 stat line, and has the following effect. While this card is on the battlefield, your opponent cannot declare attacks against elements in the Goblin archetype other than this card. Baiter is a cheap distraction really, it's mostly just there to help protect one of the goblins that I'll be talking about later. Due to its low material cost, you can easily summon Baiter back to the battlefield turn after turn from your reserves, which, as you might be able to imagine, becomes very annoying very quickly. Next up is Goblin Gatherer. It costs 1 green material to summon, has a 1/1 stat line, and has the following effect. When this card is summoned to the battlefield, draw a card from your material deck. Gatherer is more or less a free summon, being able to replace the material used to summon it. This effect can be useful if you have more than 1 material type in your material deck, as it gives you a chance to draw a material colour that you don't currently have in your hand to replace the green one used to summon Gatherer. Next up is Goblin Ambusher. It costs 2 green materials to summon, has a 3/1 stat line, and has the following effect. If your opponent declares an attack during the battle phase against a goblin element you control, react. You can pay the summoning cost of this card to summon it to your battlefield from your hand, then change your opponent's attack target to this card. Just like Baiter from before, Ambusher has another redirection effect. Its low stamina means it'll most likely be defeated in battle as soon as it's summoned, but if you choose that battle wisely, you can deal a big, unexpected blow to your opponent that they now have to adjust and work around. You can ruin a lot of people's days with Ambusher. It's great. Next up is Goblin Shaman. It costs 3 green materials to summon, has a 2/3 stat line, and has the following effect. While this card is on the battlefield, your opponent cannot target goblin elements other than this card with effects. While it doesn't have the best stats for a free cost element, its effect can give vital protection to your other goblins that they otherwise don't really have. Having Shaman on the battlefield can be the difference between your best element being destroyed and it surviving another turn. Next up is Goblin Brewer. It costs 2 green material to summon, has a 1/2 stat line, and has the following effect. When this card is summoned to the battlefield, you can add 1 rune card from your main deck with Goblin Brew in its name to your hand, then shuffle the main deck. This is the archetype's rune searcher, which is a very important role, as will soon become apparent, as I talk about the next and most important element in the archetype, Goblin Brewserker. Goblin Brewserker costs 2 green material to summon, has a 1/1 stat line, and has the following effect. This card gains +2/1 for every rune card with Goblin Brew in its name attached to it. During your end phase while this card is on your battlefield, if a rune card with Goblin Brew in its name wasn't attached to this card during your turn, send this card to the void. I'll go over these Goblin Brew runes that make Brewserker such a powerful threat in a moment, but first, the Goblin archetype also has an alchemy element. Goblin... God's sake. Goblin Master Baiter requires a Goblin Baiter and any other goblin element on the battlefield to make, has a 2 material resummoning cost, has a 1/3 stat line, and has the following effect. While this card is on the battlefield, your opponent cannot declare attacks against elements in the Goblin archetype other than this card. This card is just Goblin Baiter with better stats, and I'm convinced that the creators only made it to make a dirty joke. Now with that out of the way, let's talk about the rune cards. I'll start with the green one. Goblin Brew Spiked Drink is an attached rune with a 1 green material cost and and it has the following effect. Attach only to a Goblin element. If your opponent attacks an element attached to this card, your opponent loses 1 life point after damage calculation. If you're able to attach a spiked drink to an already buffed up Brewserker, even if your opponent can summon enough elements to take it down, they'll still be taking life point damage of each swing. It makes fighting Brewserker, or any goblin attached to it, much more dangerous. Next up is Goblin Brew Pale Ale. It's an attach rune with a 1 black material cost, and it has the following effect. Attach only to a Goblin element. If an element attached to this card is removed from the battlefield, detach this card and add it to your hand. Normally, when an element with attach runes on it is removed from the battlefield, the element goes to the reserves and the runes go to the void, but Pale Ale goes to your hand instead. This means that if Brewserker is defeated, you'll be starting your next turn with a guaranteed buff already in your hand, to restart the buffing process all over again. Next up is Goblin Brew Stiff Pint. It's an attach rune with a 1 blue material cost, and it has the following effect. Attach only to a Goblin element. Increase stamina by +1. It's a simple effect, but really, you can't go wrong with even more buffs, can you? Next up is Goblin Brew Angry Juice. It's an attach rune with a 2 red material cost, and it has the following effect. Attach only to a Goblin element. Increase strength by +1. Finally, there's Goblin Brew Grog Bucket. Unlike the others, it's a permanent rune with a free yellow material cost, and it has the following effect. This card comes into play with 3 brew counters on it, max 3. Goblin elements on the battlefield gain +1/+1 for every brew counter on this card. At the start of your turn, remove all brew counters from this card. During your summoning or recovery phase, you can pay 1 yellow material to add 1 brew counter to this card. This rune is good if you're able to get a lot of goblins out on the battlefield at once, otherwise it has a bit of an expensive upkeep. The main goal of the Goblin archetype is to make as buffed up a Brewserker as possible, to absolutely annihilate anything your opponent tries to throw out. With Baiters, Ambushers and Shamans, you can protect Brewserker from attacks and effects to keep it going. Like I said earlier, it's annoying to play against, but it's also really fun to play with, which ultimately is what green is all about. That being as terrible a person as possible, and loving every second of it. I hope you've enjoyed the first of these 5 videos. Let me know which of the remaining 4 you'd like to see me cover first. If you've got any further questions about the Goblin archetype, or about the game in general, or if what I've talked about brought back memories from when you played archetype, please let me know, either in the comments or in my Discord. I'm not going to stop until I see those cards again.